From the war against Iran to other regional conflicts, the Turkish government says diplomacy has to be the way forward. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Turkey is pushing with all diplomatic initiatives, but he acknowledges there are a number of hurdles and some saboteurs, as he puts it, who are trying to affect this process. What exactly are those hurdles? Earlier, I sat down with Turkey's Vice President, Cevdet Yilmaz, one-on-one. Mr. Vice President, let's start with the situation in Iran. Turkey has been playing an important role for a sustainable ceasefire and for a political solution. But there are a number of challenges. For example, President Erdogan earlier talked about some elements trying to sabotage the process. What are the challenges and the hurdles in your assessment?
First of all, we have tried to prevent this war on the outset, actually. President Erdogan at the leaders level and our foreign ministry, all our institutions have done their best to prevent this unnecessary, fight, war, conflict, because we know that this conflict has given rise to big instabilities in our region and also at the global level. We have economic costs, environmental, ecological costs, as well as humanitarian costs. So Turkey has done a lot to prevent it. But when it started, we have put all our efforts to bring the parties to the negotiating table. So Turkey is always on the side of peace and diplomacy and negotiated solutions. We believe that a just peace is good for all parties, and a war is, harming everybody. And we have seen this on the global economic levels as well as regional levels. So, but unfortunately, Israeli government, Netanyahu government, from the very beginning, they done everything to start this war, and now they are doing many things to continue with this war. But despite their efforts, it is good to see that we have this ceasefire now. This ceasefire should continue, and we are also doing everything possible to help the parties to come to a middle ground on their negotiations. We are working with Egypt, with Pakistan, with Saudi Arabia to help this process. The negotiating parties will come together again and work on these issues diplomatically, because there are very broad topics. They need time and energy to come to a conclusion. We believe that when you consider the costs of the war, it is worth spending all the energy and effort to reach a diplomatic solution.
Speaking of Israel, there are statements from cabinet members of Israel, even Benjamin Netanyahu, where they've talked about greater Israel, taking a very ideological sort of line. Even references to Turkey. Does Turkey see that as mere sort of statements for domestic consumption, or what's the threat assessment here?
Of course, we, especially the words directed towards Turkey and President Erdogan, we don't give any significance to these words. We believe that Netanyahu government have committed genocide, international crimes, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and they are currently under, judicial process internationally. So what they are trying to do is to, shadow this whole thing and try to cover their, crimes. So we believe that this is a psychology of expressing their criminal situation. So we don't pay any significant attention to this. As Turkey, we will continue to work for peace, for prosperity of the region, for the stability of the region. No matter what other actors are doing, this is our policy, and we will continue with this policy. We will continue to support diplomatic initiatives. We will continue to support two-state solution to the Palestinian issue. We will continue to support sovereignty and territorial integrity of the countries in the region. We will continue to defend international law.
Syrian president has been praising Turkey. He said that Turkey has done a lot over the last 14 years or so. He's been praising Turkish role. But at the same time, we're seeing Israel's expansionist policies in Syria as well. And Turkey has said that Turkey is not going to allow, as you were mentioning, their territorial integrity to be challenged and so forth. What sort of measures is Turkey planning on taking to try and secure the borders of Syria?
Syria has gone through very terrible times, actually. There was a civil war, a dictatorship. Syrian people had enough of, stress and, conflict, fighting. So what Syria needs now is stability. And President Shara is doing a great job, actually. He is acting in a very wise way, and he has been integrated with the world politics. And now Syria is trying to recover from its wounds that have been done in many years. And Turkey, as a neighbor, of course, supports Syria because the instabilities in Syria are directly affecting us. We have millions of Syrian brothers and sisters as refugees in Turkey. We had paid many costs during the Syrian civil war. And now that Syria has this stability, we should all support this stability, not only Turkey, but all the other regional actors and international actors should support Syria. And we are happy to see that Syria is being integrated. Europe is lifting some of the sanctions. US is lifting sanctions towards Syria. So Syria will again be a more stable, more prosperous country. By the way, Syria has a great civilization. It is not an ordinary country, actually. When you look at history, Syria has a big, great civilization and a culture of tolerance, actually, with different groups of people, with different ethnicities, sectarian groups. And we believe that a comprehensive, and inclusive government in Syria is in the best interest of all parties. So Turkey is not differentiating one group from another, but supports territorial integrity, sovereignty of Syria, as well as inclusive governments in Syria that will bring stability not only to Syria, but to the whole region. And there are many other regional actors also supporting this, like Saudi Arabia, like some other neighboring countries. So we believe that with all these efforts and with, of course, wise governance of President Shara and his team, we will have much better prospects for Syria.
You've talked about greater regional collaboration, especially with countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. There's also more talk about the need for a new security architecture. What exactly does that entail?
Actually, I was on a panel this morning. We were discussing about this regional, initiatives. Unfortunately, international rules and institutions are weakened, especially with genocide in Gaza, in many and some other geopolitical conflicts. We see that international rules, international regulations are weakened. This is also true in economic terms. I mean, we have now this tariff wars, etc. So under these conditions, we should work, of course, on the one hand, for a new international order, for a fairer global structures of governance. And President Erdogan has repeatedly said that the world is bigger than five. That is not just a reform of UN, actually. This is a call for fairer global environment, governance structures. But until we have such a governance structure at the global level, we should develop bilateral and regional initiatives, not only in security, but also in economy, in connectivity. So Turkey has this vision of developing regional and bilateral relations for the benefit of all parties. And that is part of this security initiatives are part of this broader vision for developing regional collaboration.
Mr. Vice President, there have been many statements from African leaders praising the Turkish approach. So they've been saying that unlike the approach, the colonialist, post-colonialist approach of some Western countries, the way Turkey deals with African countries is very different. Now, you're speaking about the need for a new international system, a new order. What's been the reaction and response you've been getting from the global south as you engage with them?
First of all, I mean, Turkey is in a very special position. We are in between three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. So Turkey is in a position to understand different worlds. We understand the concerns of the North as well as South. We understand the perspective of West and the East. And that gives us a great advantage. Second, we don't have this colonial, backlog, colonial past. Our relation with Africa, with Asia, is a relation that is based on a win-win approach. We don't want to exploit any country or any part of the world. We just want to make more trade, more investment, and mutually beneficial activities. And that is pursued by our partners in Africa. And Africa, by the way, is the most dynamic continent on the earth. And we believe that Africa has a great future. That is why we have this African initiative under President Erdogan, and we have developed our embassies, our trades, our flights with Turkish Airlines and everything else with Africa. And we believe that these connections with Africa will be beneficial for both Turkey and Africa, and we will continue to pursue this strong bond with Africa.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for talking to TRT World.
Thank you.